Friends, welcome back. This is episode 4 of the Ghost Towns of Freeborn County, and I'm your host, Gary Schindler, a historian and member of the board of the Freeborn County Historical Museum and Village. Today we're going to take a look at the churches of Freeborn County. Again, I've mentioned previously that our county was pretty diverse economically, with a lot of agricultural resources, rich soil, but also a very diverse collection of folks from a number of countries and states, and also a diversity of its faith community. So we're going to examine some of the churches that existed in our village and give you a sense of the depth of the faith community in Freeborn County. Now, the principal languages in Freeborn County were Danish, Swedish, Norwegian, but there were Germans as well. And the churches were organized around language. And another aspect of language is that there's a great similarity between the Norwegian language and the Danish language, even in the spelling of words and nuanced pronunciation, that you had a language called Norsk-Dansk. I think in a previous episode I may have referred of Dansk-Norsk, but Norsk-Dansk was a blending of Norwegian and Danish, and there were actually a church synod organized around that language, and churches that were established in Freeborn County that were called Norsk-Dansk Lutheran churches. To give you, again, a sense of the faith community, just be mindful that the first preachers through Freeborn County were itinerant, traveling ministers that conducted baptisms, funerals, and weddings. And many of the churches were initially established or had services in someone's home. It might have been the schoolhouse, because schoolhouses were a common structure in the day. And also it might have been conducted church services in a business establishment. There are references in the history of Freeborn County about services being held in a general store, for example. But to give you an idea, in 1882, there were 23 different summer Sabbath schools held across the county. So I would consider that like a vacation Bible school. So 23 different summer Sabbath schools across the county. And in the fall through spring, there were 12 organized Sunday schools across Freeborn County. So let's be mindful of, again, the nature of the church. The historical records, I got this from the Central Freeborn Lutheran Church, is that many of the Norwegian and Danish children were baptized in Freeborn County as early as the mid-1850s by what was called circuit riding or itinerant pastors of the Norwegian Evangelical Lutheran Synod. You know, besides Sunday school and summer Sabbath school, many churches had a cemetery associated with their church, and you understand that if you drive around the county, the only remnants of the church may be the cemetery, but there are some churches that still are around that have the cemetery nearby. One example where there were an established church but not a cemetery was the ghost town of Sumner, and Sumner is east of Oakland, northeast of Hayward, and there were a couple churches there prior to 1880. Sumner isn't listed as part of the census data in 1880, but there was a Hollis Hildreth, Hildreth, who was a farmer and the postmaster in the Sumner area, and he offered 4.5 acres of land to be used as a cemetery for that village. What occurred, this is just a little anecdote, but in 1934, during some road construction, some bodies were discovered in the farmland of Mr. Hildreth, and those bodies were exhumed and moved to the Fairview Cemetery, which is north of I-90, southwest of Moscow. And Mr. Hildreth had passed away in 1864, and his headstone was removed and kept for safekeeping so it could be reestablished in the Fairview Cemetery. But it was inadvertently used as a stepping stone to a barn until that headstone could be relocated. So just a little odd story there. The other thing to be thinking about as far as the institutions of Freeborn County, we have obviously schools established as an institution, businesses and the farming community. We have the faith community, but there are also what are called secret societies that were established in Freeborn County in its early settlement in the mid to late 1800s. Here's just an example. The Masonic Lodge, Freemasonry was established in Albert Lea and had 74 members. The Grange, or the Patrons of Husbandry. This is a social, political organization of farmers that advocated for legislation, principally. So it's a political organization, and their principal platform was to advocate for regulation of railroads and to reduce the shipping costs for farmers in the area. There were 24 chapters of the Grange in Freeborn County with 960 members. They copied some of the rituals of the Masonic Lodge, advocated for Christian values and principles, but they are also temperate, opposed to alcohol, and they're also progressive in a way. The Grange was, because they were advocating for the right for women to vote. Some other secret societies in Freeborn County outside of our organized churches were the Sons of Temperance that advocated for abstinence of alcohol. There were 30 members of the Sons of Temperance. And then there was the Good Templar Lodge. There were 8 chapters of the Good Templar Lodge in Freeborn County. They had over 700 members, and their principal thing was abstinence from alcohol and drugs. So let's take a look at the faith community here in Freeborn County. One example would be Bath, again, north central Freeborn County, on the northern edge of the county along the border. Bath, this is a story of their Catholic Church. Again, in 1880, Bath had a population of 919 individuals, and their faith community consisted of the Danish Baptist Church, Norwegian Lutheran Church, and the Catholic Church, St. Aidan's Catholic Church. So those were the organized congregations in Bath, for example. So here's a little history on the Danish Baptist Church in Bath. That society was organized in 1863, and for its first 2 years, its services were held in the homes of Nels Larsen and Hans Christensen until a log church was built in 1865. That church measured 20 by 26 feet and could seat around 100 members. A formal church structure itself was erected in 1875 for a cost of $1,200, and that could seat around 200 people. One of their first ministers was a Reverend Lunn, and they raised $1,000 annually for expenses, including a salary for the minister of $200. So that's a Danish Baptist church. Then we have a Danish Lutheran church that was organized in 18 1874. We have a Lutheran, or a Norwegian Lutheran church with some parishioners from Bancroft. That church was erected in 1868 at a cost of $2,000. So you can see the language organization: Danish Baptist, Danish Lutheran, Norwegian Lutheran. And then we have the Catholic Church, St. Aidan's, that was established by Michael Sheehan in 1865. It started off in a home, and then there was a small frame building that was built, and later a larger church. That church was relocated to Ellendale in 1955. So the remnants of St. Aidan's in Bath are at Cemetery. You would drive out on a gravel road, you would see a grove of trees, and as you enter on the gravel road, you see the cemetery laid out before you, with many of the tombstones reflecting a passing in the late 1880s. And there's a beautiful, I consider it an altar that is built out of marble in the middle of that cemetery. Walking through the cemetery, it's well taken care of, but you'll learn about some of the residents. We have, for example, the gravestone of Mary Macaulay. She was a wife of Hugh Noland, and it notes on her tombstone that she was born in Fermanagh, Ireland, and she passed in 1885 at the age of 69. You'll also see a prominent headstone of Anastasia Kiley, who passed in 1911. Again, a very well-maintained cemetery, another indication of where our folks were from. In the area of Bath, we have John Lonergan, who was born in Tipperary, Ireland in 1829 and passed in 1885. Taking a look at another ghost town is Newry, up in the northeast corner of Freeborn County. Their principal churches were St. Mary's Catholic Church, established in 1892, and then we have another Norwegian Lutheran church, which was renamed Red Oaks Norsk Lutheran Church, 200 members in 1880. But the Norwegian Lutheran Church in Newry, for many years, from 1856, when that congregation was established, to 1874, was services were conducted in people's homes, and then the church was built in 1874, actually ended up in Mower County. So we don't dwell too much on that since our focus is Freeborn County. And then another community, is to give you a sense of the diversity of the faith community in our ghost towns, is Moscow. Again, you may recall from a previous episode, Moscow was first settled in 1855 and organized as a village in 1858. Was named by a resident for the fires set in Moscow with the invasion of Napoleon, and those memories were triggered by a fire in a stand of oak trees by one of the residents, and said, well, let's name our little village Moscow. In 1880, the population of Moscow, Freeborn County, Minnesota, was 650 people. And let me just give you a sense of the diversity of the faith community. These were the congregations that were organized in Moscow in the 1880s. We have Lutherans, we have Congregationalists, we have, which met in the school or in people's homes. We have a Methodist congregation, sometimes called the Episcopal Society, again, meeting in people's homes, and then finally built a church. We have Baptist, Presbyterians, we have the Sumner Moscow Presbyterian Church, and we have a Campbellite congregation. The churchgoers in Moscow were described as puritanic in their tendencies, which would probably indicate very conservative. Just to give you a sense of what these congregations were like, a Congregationalist church was a Calvinistic church, really believed in independence. I would say it's somewhere in the nature of being like Presbyterians or Baptists. There's principally two sacraments for the Congregationalist church, which was baptism and communion. But there was an independent streak in the Congregationalists. They believed in the independency of the church. So therefore, the congregation would decide what their faith statement would be and what the form of their worship would be. That was up to each congregation to determine that. They were called a priesthood of believers and very independent. Campbellites would have a link to the Church of England. Thomas Campbell is probably the founder of that Protestant congregation. They believed in the unification of all churches, that really the Protestants and Christians are one single body, and characterized by a shunning of musical instruments, not a lot of ornamentation within a church, considered somewhat of a primitive form of Christianity, but believed in the unification of all Christian congregations. In Moscow, you will find the Moscow Lutheran Church is still there. It's a white building with a little steeple, and there is a well-maintained cemetery near the Moscow Lutheran Church. In walking the grounds, I did find the headstone of the Wiker family, W-I-K-E-R, and we have Ole and Margaret and Carl and also Julius. Their passings ranged from 1844, 1906, 1910, and 1945. Again, very well maintained, a very respectful maintenance of that museum. The other thing I wanted to mention, too, is that in Freeborn County, the Norwegian Lutherans were very organized. So they established in key geographic locations a variety of Norwegian Lutheran church congregations. We have north, south, east, west, and central Norwegian Lutheran church congregations. So the rural communities and the communities of these villages would have a church that was very nearby, not a far distance, so they could attend churches on a regular basis. Let me kind of give you a sense of the organization of the Norwegian Lutheran Church and how it evolved. Most Norwegian immigrants to the United States that came here in the late 1850s and early 1860s were members of the Church of Norway, which was established by the Constitution of the country of Norway. When they settled in this new land, and also including Freeborn County, they kind of wanted to establish their own faith communities. So you start to see a divergence of Norwegian Lutheran faiths. So here's an example. We have, as far as the structure goes, we have the United Norwegian Lutheran Church of America, which was a union in 1890 of the Norwegian Augustana Synod, which was established in 1870, and the Conference of Norwegian Danish Evangelical Lutherans. That synod was established in 1870. In 1897, a group of congregations left the United Lutheran Church and formed what is called the Lutheran Free Church, and that was in 1897. And in 1900, there was another group of congregations that formed the Church of the Lutheran Brethren of America. So again, these Norwegians are trying to get organized around their faith principles, and it seems a bit convoluted, but that's how that structure was established. The United Norwegian Lutheran Church in 1917, with two other synods, the Hague Synod and the Norwegian Synod, they formed the Norwegian Lutheran Church of America, which later changed its name to the Evangelical Lutheran Church, which we may be very familiar with. And now it's the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. A little bit of a convoluted layout of the churches, the organization of the Norwegian churches. Here's another example of how the Norwegian Lutherans were organized. This is in the village of Freeman, population of about 772 people. And they had two congregations about a mile apart. One was the Norwegian Lutheran Church with 200 members that was established in 1874. They built a church at the price of $1,350, and that was destroyed in a windstorm, and it did have to be built. And then we have a Norsk-Dansk Lutheran Church in Freeman that was built in 1878 at a cost of $1,400, and that congregation was 150 members. We have these two Lutheran churches then, a mile apart, serving 350 Lutherans, but that division, Norwegian Lutheran versus the Norsk-Dansk Lutherans. And again, those are language differences. We have Norwegians that worship together, and then we have this blending of the Danish and Norwegian language. It's a language that stands alone called Norsk-Dansk, and there was even a Norsk-Dansk Lutheran Synod, and those folks worshiped separately. So it gives you a sense of that organization of churches across Freeborn County. I'd like to showcase, too, that Norwegian organization of churches. Again, we have North and South, Central, East, and West Norwegian Lutheran churches in Freeborn County. And Central Freeborn County Lutheran Church served Albert Lee and Lørdal, which again is north of and east of Albert Lee. And talking to some of the parishioners of the Central Freeborn Lutheran Church, they spoke of the structure of these geographically located churches across the county. And a parishioner told me that it was, meant to serve the people of Lørdal, but also the people of Albert Lee and the farm community, thus the need for the organization to serve those different farm communities. I'd like to conclude this episode of Ghost Towns of Freeborn County with a look at the differences, the slight differences between Norwegian and Danish language. There was a headstone at the Central Freeborn Lutheran Church for the Lundy family, Matthias and Boll, and it notes their date of birth and the date that they passed. Matthias passed in 1883, and Boll, B-O-O-L, passed in 1906. But the birth date is, the birth is spelled F-O-D-T, and the died reference is D-O-D-E. It's spelt the same way in Norwegian as in Danish. So, for example, the Norwegian pronunciation of born is foot, but the Danish version of born is fut. The same with died. The Norwegian pronunciation of died is dud, and the Danish version is dod. So a different emphasis on those syllables, but you can see the similarity, at least hopefully in that example, of the similarity between the Norwegian and Danish churches in Freeborn County. Folks, I appreciate you listening. Our next episode, the fifth one, is going to be a profile of some of our ghost town communities in Freeborn County. And then the 6th episode will likely carry on with a community profile, but also some strange and unusual tales across Freeborn County in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Again, I appreciate you listening. This is Gary Schindler, the host of Ghost Towns of Freeborn County.
This collaboration is made possible by the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund through the vote of Minnesotans on November 4th, 2008, administered by the Minnesota Historical Society.